Okay, everybody, thank you very much. It's about 3 minutes after we'll get started. Thank you today for joining us today on the FIXinar. Greatly appreciate all our members and participants that are joining us today and continuously helping drive the vision and the mission of Fix. This is the 6th episode of the Americas 2021 FIXinar series. This presentation will cover a presentation from Hanno Klein, the co-chair of the Fix GTC committee. We'll have a panel of experts to walk through some of the latest advancements or technical updates that the Fix community is advancing with our panelists' help. FIXinar is going to be governed by, Chatham House rules. Any quotes or anything moving out of this session, please come back to the Fix community or the representatives of Fix to verify and validate whether the information can move beyond this setting. So we appreciate everybody's support there. I want to just highlight, this is one of many working groups, the technical committee. There are multiple working groups that are very active, that actually are active but need more participation from everyone on the call or your colleagues that are on the call today. These are the working groups that actually drive the mission of Fix and all the initiatives. And there's great opportunity to advance these things that you see listed on this page. And the key thing is most of these things are very actionable and tangible things that are helping us today manage our businesses together. So if you look at Fix as a protocol, the data formats and how they play into our workflows from execution or order and execution to post-trade through regulatory reporting, there's a lot of opportunity to use Fix further and to satisfy those discretionary and non-discretionary things that we're continuously focused on, many of which are very live and reaching deadlines and new deadlines coming to support all that. So again, get active, stay inside these worker groups, make them relevant, and so we can turn them into more tangible things where we can use Fix. Without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Hanno, who will take us through the panel today and has a lot of great information to share across that panel. Hanno, off to you.
Thank you, Lou. I'll be sharing my screen here. The screen is okay. Let me get to that. Okay, here we go. Hope everybody can see the slides. So my name is Hanno Klein. Quite active on the Global Technical Committee since many years, and today is about something that I think is fairly new to people, the Fix latest and term, and a lot of people don't really know what that is about. And today is trying to bring some clarity on this and how that's connected to Fix Orchestra that some of you may be aware of more than regarding Fix latest, what that actually is. I'll just show a little bit about Fix technical standards and then talk about Fix latest in a little detail, giving some examples, and then also about the area of tools where we provide a number of those, and FIXimate is probably the one that most people are familiar with, and that's out there since many years. We just released generation 4 of this software and greatly enhanced. I encourage you to take a look at fiximate.fixtrading.org. So let's just get right into it. And Fix latest is more than just a version. That's what's on the slide, and that's important to know. We chose that term intentionally, not just version 6 or something else. So it's about Fix latest. That's the Fix application layer. And since 10 years now, we are publishing extension packs with incremental enhancements of the application layer, and that all belongs to Fix latest. And it stands for a concept that you use from the standard what you need to cover your requirements. So in recent years, regulators have become more and more prescriptive, and the demand on specific fields and values has increased, and so a lot of coverage wasn't provided by the legacy versions, and extension packs have been published to fill that gap. FIXlatest also stands for a change of concept in terms of making things available online. And I don't mean downloadable documents, but true websites, web pages for the normative specification, where you can then also use external links to point to certain parts of the specification with your counterparties. And also Generation 4 FIXimate, the new one, allows you to have permanent links into any field or component or message. And so that's, I think, one of the aspects of FIXlatest as well. The begin string, most people that have done something in Fix on an implementation layer know what that's about. And this has changed with Fix 5 more than 10 years ago, that no longer the Fix version is in there, but still these names, Fix.4.2, Fix.4.4, they also relate to the application layer. So that could be some cause for confusion. With FIXlatest, we're saying now this begin string is limited to the session profile. So how the session, how the transport is being organized, and does not represent the application semantics. So with that brief introduction, I'd like to do a couple polls. Here's the first one. Do you use Fix 4.2 or 4.4 with fields or values from extension packs? So what are you actually using in your implementations? And if you could please pick now where you fall, that'd be great. So that's the result. So there's at least 30% of those 34 that voted that aren't using any fields from higher versions. Interesting, but a lot. So almost 3/4 of those that voted, they do. Thank you. So we'll go to the next one, which is about Fix Orchestra. Just a very quick one. Are you familiar with Fix Orchestra? Yes, and you're also using it. Yes, but haven't really had anything to do with it, or you haven't heard of it. Okay, let's close that poll. And so of the 41, there are 37% that have never heard of it. So good that we have the session today, which will help to understand what it's about. It's not something you use 50%, but there's 15% who are already from those that voted that are already using. So that's encouraging, and we want to bring this forward, the FIXlatest, together with Fix Orchestra. And what is Fix Orchestra? It's more than just a repository. That's the main statement here. So there were there was a basic and a unified repository before, but now Fix Orchestra is, to begin with, a Fix technical standard for metadata, describing how you would define things to make a machine readable rules of engagement artifact, in this case, also an XML file. So the legacy formats were static, just describe what messages and fields and values were available. Fix Orchestra adds a lot of dynamic aspects like conditional rules, scenarios, workflows, even state change models. You can model in a Fix Orchestra XML file and use that to drive automation on your side for development and testing, and even for the documentation of the rules of engagement. So Fix Orchestra is also obviously internally the source of reference for the specification, as well as for tools like FIXimate or other things. So the bottom of this slide just shows you FIXlatest, how it's evolved and how important it probably is to be using extensions from after Fix 4.4, because Fix 4.4 was less than 100 messages, less than 1,000 fields. We are now at 164 messages and almost 6,000 fields. A large portion comes from the OTC derivatives area, but still there's at least 3 times as many outside of that asset class. Okay, let's move on. Some of you may have already seen this this slide. It's the stack of the FIX technical standards with the application layer on top, also the FIX protocol, the essence of FIX, where you see FIX latest showing up. And then you have the encoding, which is the syntax or the wire format, how to transport messages. And then you have the session layer, the choreography between counterparties. And the FIX session layer has been submitted to ISO last year and is just about to be published in its final version. So it is also not just a FIX standard, but also an ISO standard 3531. And we have called the different flavors of the FIX session layer, or we've called them session profiles. And the session profiles are then documented in the begin string as a value in begin string, or as they have a corresponding value in begin string, to be exact. So the profile names are fix.4.2, fix4, fix-t, and lfix-t, which is lightweight fix-t, which is lacking the retransmission capability. So the legacy 4.2, 4.4, you can see are part of the session profiles there. But today is not about the session layer, it's about the application layer, so FIX latest. And here to explain begin string, that was the key element to also know what application layer version this is about. It's in every FIX message, part of the standard header, and up to FIX 4.4. There was a mandatory change of that value, and there was a single value only. And as of FIX 5, it indicated the session layer version. So it's as of FIX 5, there's the begin string says fix-t.1.1, and fix-t stands for FIX transport. An application-specific version field was added with FIX 5 optionally, where you had enumerated values like 4 equals FIX 4.2 and 6 equals FIX 4.4. So you could then convey to your counterparty which is the main FIX version that you are using here. And FIX latest doesn't require any change to your begin string, and that's a key point about regarding those that may think, well, do I need FIX latest, and what does it mean to migrate to FIX latest? Maybe you're already using FIX latest because you are using tags from extension packs from higher versions. And but formally, we had to introduce FIX latest as another valid value of application version ID. And then the begin string is about the session layer, and you can choose your session profile with that value. And so here some examples regarding what this practically means. So you have a FIX session running FIX 4.2 with the begin string, the well-known begin string value, but you may need tags that are higher than tag 446, which is the highest one in that version. And new business requirements or regulatory requirements, any of that. So you have a number of choices, looking for a user-defined field that exists, or defining a new one in the range from 20,000 to 39,999. But you could also look in FIX latest if that's maybe covered already, a standard field in that range. And maybe also it's in the existing tag within the range of 1 to 446, but there's new values, new codes that you need, and which weren't available in FIX 4.2. So FIX latest as a concept is when you avoid user-defined fields and look for standard fields and values from FIX latest instead. So that's the first example here regarding how that looks in practice. So the business requirement assumed to be requiring support for an SEC rule change, handling of stop and stop limit orders, You need to have something to express that you have a stop on quote or a stop limit order on quote. And extension pack 166 was actually the one that added that to Fix. And so it's a valid value, R and S from a tag, order type, field order type, tag 40. And you could simply just use that, even though that was not introduced with Fix 4.2. Second example is getting a little more complex, that until Fix 4.2, the individual actors were individual fields, so exec broker to identify its executing firm. And with Fix 4.3, then the parties component was introduced, and the party roles were greatly extended over the years. And you may have a MiFID II requirement to convey the LEI of the executing firm as well as the investment decision maker. So that's where you need a new party ID source for the LEI that didn't exist at the time, and you need a new party role 122 for the investment decision maker. So the message is just use it, don't worry. You can still run your session layer on Fix 4.2. You don't have to change the begin string. You just use new values, in this case, from the parties component, and can use the parties component as such if you haven't done so within Fix 4.2. And I've seen implementations of Fix 4.2 using the parties component. So all of that is permitted. Last example here is the business requirement to support trade reports in addition to execution reports. So again, you have a choice. Fix offers the flexibility of user-defined messages. So the trade capture report, you could find that as such, but you could just simply use the one that's available from Fix latest with all of its fields and values and components in there. The recommendations that we want to convey here is just don't change your begin string value if you don't need to make changes to your session layer, because that requires your counterparty to also make those changes. And the application version ID, application extension ID is not very specific. Tells you a little bit about what you are using, but Fix Orchestra XML files are very, very specific and give you the exact subset of messages, fields, and values that you are supporting when communicating with your counterparty. And there's another tag, 1129, custom application version ID, where you can, which you can set to your own version of your software, which is represented by the Orchestra repository element. So you can define it in those machine-readable rules of engagement. And Orchestra offers pedigree attributes. So when was something added, updated, deprecated? And we obviously use it from the Global Technical Committee to convey when we added something to the standard, but you can use it for your own implementation to reflect any changes that you've made to your interface. So let's just move forward to tools. Last point here, last area, that a number of very basic tools are provided to the community. And the main goal is to increase the level of automation that we think is needed to increase efficiency and to just lower the cost of development and testing of fixed interface software. Some are members only, like Log to Orchestra, looking at the Fix engine log file, translating that to a Fix Orchestra file. FIXinar is open and public, a GUI tool, and then there's also open source in the GitHub presence of Fix. So tablature for converting Orchestra to Markdown and vice versa. So the current status, talked about FIXinar 4 just being released with extensive new features. Log to Orchestra is out there as a version 1.0. Version 1.1 is about to be released. Octave and playlist in the making, and playlist is of interest. It allows you to interactively select a subset of an Orchestra repository to actually click on boxes, to click on messages, fields, components, values, to say this is my interface. and then it creates an Orchestra XML file for you. And the GUIs are currently just available to Fix members. The GitHub Tablature project is an open source project. So with that, just a glimpse here of the screenshots of the different tools: FIXimate, FixLog to Orchestra to convert things, and Fix Playlists is maybe the most interesting new thing on the horizon, where you can actually click your way through the GUI to put together whatever you need there. Okay, with that, I'll stop my presentation. This is sort of a picture of how things can work together, but let's not get into that in detail, and rather see if there are any questions right now before we then switch to the panel, where we'll obviously also have a chance afterwards for some questions. Okay, let me stop sharing. And let me check. Okay, no questions so far. Then yeah, so let me introduce.
Hanno, sorry,
yes.
there was a question that I replied.
Oh, so I missed that in the chat. So there's a separate Q. Oh, the Q&A.
Yeah, there was a question whether the log to Orchestra source will be made available to members. What I indicated in the reply is the tool itself is available to members. Yeah,
so members can get registered to have access to the development site to test the software, and access to our internal Jira system for tickets, to raise tickets there, including obviously enhancement. But log to Orchestra source is not open source. So, but there's a Fix Orchestra working group that discusses tools and features, and so I encourage people to join that group, and then topics like that can also be discussed in that group. Okay, thank you, Lisa. So maybe we'll just do a quick round of introductions, and yeah, Lisa, if you just maybe start a quick presentation of yourself, and we'll take it from there.
Hi, my name is Lisa Tykes-Zetterporn. I have been in and around Fix for over 20 years. Today, I also help the Fix community with some technical project management behind the scenes, and obviously help my commercial clients as well to adopt Fix and Fix Orchestra. So I've been actively involved here for longer than I want to admit.
Okay, thank you. Next on my screen is Brian Driscoll. If you can say something.
Hi, I'm Brian Driscoll. I've been using Fix for probably 20 years and been actively involved in the community for the past 5 to 10 years, and currently leading the development of NiFix at Activity Broadridge.
And we have another Brian Lees. Over to you.
Hi, Brian Lees. I am currently a manager in the IT area at Capital Group. I've been there for about 24 years, so a long time. Been there from the inception of our use of Fix, starting out from IOIs and building all the way up to order routing. I also been for the last not sure how many years, not as many as Lisa, but been working with the Fix community, leading the execution transparency working group and Fix global buy side.
Okay, thank you, Brian. I see that we have another question there, so I'll just answer that briefly. Is there any move from legacy Fix format to ISO 2022? So ISO 2022 is not just a syntax, an XML syntax, but it's also a business model. So one could use an hour to talk about that, and which we don't have today, but the fixed syntax is a fixed syntax, and the semantics is what's important. And Lisa happens to be in one of those, or not one of those, in the working group that looks into semantics, ISO group, and we are liaising with ISO to ensure that semantics can be aligned, and that the wire format doesn't play that huge role. So whatever syntax it is then expressed in, and but it's a very important question. Thank you for that. And Fix has always been using ISO standards for currency codes, for LEIs, things like that. So okay, so we have like 20 minutes now for a brief discussion, and then open it up for more questions or continue our discussion. So I'd like to pick some of the questions that we put in the invitation to the event, and see what our panelists think about those topics. So obviously in my slides, I had said Fix latest is not just a version but a concept, but I'd like to get some feedback what people on the panel think, why Fix latest is, well, the way forward there, instead of adding one version after the next, and how Fix latest can help to get people to use all of what's available in Fix today. So any volunteers?
Yeah, I can start. Yes, thinking back to, I mentioned the Fix Execution Transparency Working Group. At the time that we issued guidelines for gathering more information on fills, one of the primary pieces of information we wanted was the tag 851, and of course, as you mentioned, most people on the equity side, at least, are Fix 4.2, especially back then. So 851 was not part of that, that version of the spec, but we recommended at the time that people relax their, any stringent validation of Fix and allow tag Fix 851 to be sent, but also specified an alternative user-defined field in case that wasn't possible. But in a sense, we've kind of been doing Fix latest since that time, because it was, sort of needed for, business reasons at the time, and we wanted to, stay as standard as possible. And as far as I know, from my experience, most people were able to do that, so I think this concept's been out there for a long time already, but it's good to have it formally recognized in this way, I think.
Okay, thank you. Any thoughts to add, Brian or Lisa?
Yeah, so with, I think if you go back in time, historically, the innovations of Fix had been available to the general, youth population every time a new version of Fix came out, and that's very monolithic. And with Fix latest, I think it enshrines the fact that as extension packs are available, people can immediately begin to use them. And there's probably 10 to 20 extension packs, that get released a year. And there's a lot of changes and innovation going on with Fix, and Fix latest, I think, makes it clear that you can start using that innovation immediately with the versions that you're on.
Yeah, I think what I want to add there is, I think with the regulatory changes, particularly with Dodd-Frank and MiFID and MiFIR, it just pushed a lot of people to relax the validation rules, particularly with legacy Fix engines, to accommodate the new standard tags into Fix 4.4 or Fix 4.2 as needed. It just helps with keeping things as standard as possible.
Yeah. And then the other nice thing about the extension packs are each extension pack is, released with, both the fixed Orchestra format and the unified repository. And if you have tools that can, read that XML and understand its semantics, you can generate up the validation and anything you might need for creating the messages programmatically. So that's all released in readable format, and you can have, or your vendors can have tools that work with that.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, so this brings me to the topic of interoperability and what this is actually about, because You often hear, well, we are on Fix 4.2 and we can't upgrade to a higher version because then we're not interoperable with our counterparties. But is interoperability really about the session layer, so the begin string value, or the application layer where you have to add fields for regulatory purposes, and obviously the applications on both sides need to be able to either produce those tags and content or consume them? What is the most pressing or the key issue when it comes to interoperability? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, what Lisa mentioned about MIFID is a really good example, because there was quite a few fields that were coming from later versions of the protocol, party IDs and things like that. In equity, I support equity primarily, so we're still on 4.2 on almost all of our sessions, and so for us to have supported MIFID and stuck to the rules of that version 4.2. We would have had to upgrade all of our sessions to 4.4 if we couldn't, relax the rules and allow this sort of fixed latest approach. So it was kind of, essential that we be able to do that, because when we went from 4.0 to 4.2, we spent probably 2 years moving all of our brokers over. It's a massive effort to do that sort of thing, and so not feasible to do on an ongoing basis when you have this need to do something, to react to regulation or something else, in a short time frame.
Okay. There's something that's probably lesser known about the Fix Orchestra technical standard is that it is both a standard for the repository, so for the application layer, but also has a second model, interface model, where you can express your sessions, your connections, and you have a syntax to express IP addresses, anything that's relevant for the connections, and could also automate things on that front. So that's something that's much less known about Fix Orchestra there. Okay. Then maybe we stay on the application layer and talk about sort of the relevance of machine readable rules of engagement, because that's something that Fix would really like to drive forward, that the community is able to benefit from that. And the question is, how important do you see the availability of machine readable rules of engagement that can be exchanged with counterparties?
Yeah, so I can start there. You look at what it takes to, say, move to a new version of an application or do something that impacts all your connections. And most institutions and brokers, you're talking hundreds, if not, many hundreds of connections. And to retest all that takes a lot of work today. And with Fix Orchestra, you could use the Fix Orchestra documents to basically figure out what test cases need to be implemented. You could do that in a somewhat automated fashion, and that could create your test plans. And today, to move to a new system or new version or upgrade different components in your environment takes a large amount of manpower to test that across many Fix connections. And this could be a way to reduce the amount of manpower that you need and automate it more. And it's a big expense for people to do that. So I think it could definitely, if it were used properly, it could definitely save time and money.
Yeah, I agree with that. From a buy-side perspective, we have 2 people full-time plus another person probably half-time overseeing what they're doing nothing but keeping our Fix sessions up and running, changing out algo suites as they change over time. Things like, when MIFID comes along, the changes that we have to test, things like that, version upgrades, et cetera. It really never ends. And so, yeah, the possibility of automating that to any extent would be, could be very beneficial. So obviously it's going to require coordination between buy side and sell side. and vendors, right, in order to make that work across the industry. But it could be very promising if we got a good amount of people working in that direction.
Yeah, I think I want to add to what Brian Lees is saying in terms of testing, as well as Brian Driscoll. I mean, it's not just external testing with your counterparty. You can potentially build an internal test suite to do internal testing. If you're doing agile development, you can run smoke tests every night. If you have a core set of test suites that you run every time you have completed a software build, just to make sure the core pieces did not fail. But test automation in and of itself is a discipline that has to be taken seriously and built out with competent resources as well. I mean, I used to do that in my previous life, so I know what that's all about.
Yeah, and I would like to add a significant feature of Orchestra is called scenarios. So those of you that are familiar with a unified repository and are maybe already benefiting from it since many years, which is also an XML representation, but you only have one execution report, yeah, and it's the superset of all use cases, all test cases. And with Fix Orchestra, you could have any number of execution reports defined to express the different test cases. You add an order and it's immediately executed, or it's just added to the book, or you have a restatement. So you could design any number of scenarios where you have specific message layout, so specific subsets of the execution report fields and maybe even also values of exec type, order status, and then you have that in written form, and that drives your test cases. And so that's a major enhancement of Fix Orchestra compared to the unified repository, for those of you that are familiar with that. Okay. Another area I wanted to touch on is the one of customization, and the term technical debt is also used there. So obviously, it's one of the greatest features of Fix that you can customize your interface, meaning you can add custom fields, or we call them user-defined fields, and a lot of fields, a lot of standard fields allow user-defined values, 100 and above, or 1,000 and above. And so obviously, this feature has been greatly used. And sometimes I believe even misused. But the question is, how relevant is it in terms of standardization to get people to look into Fix Latest to avoid these customizations, or do you see customization as sort of a necessary evil that we will always have? I'd like to get some views on how you see that customization feature.
So, I think it will probably always be a necessary evil, because there'll always be new features that aren't captured in any extension pack. But many times when you go to, extend an application, you're doing something that somebody already has covered in the past. And if you can use Fix Latest in existing extension packs, you're going to position yourself to be more compatible down the road with more counterparties and less work. But you might be breaking new ground and there's nothing available. In that case, I think you'd have to use custom tags.
Or if you're a Fix member, I would encourage approaching one of the working groups, or even directly to the Global Technical Committee with a proposal saying, this is a new feature I want standardized, which a lot of our member firms, particularly the exchanges, have done in the past. So I think that's really how Fix itself evolved to support new features, is through member contributions.
Yeah, I agree. Hanno, I think there's kind of two distinctions, right? One is, are you using custom fields because you wanted to use something that was defined in Fix, but it wasn't in your version of the protocol, so you went to a custom field, versus you're using a custom field because that concept just didn't exist in Fix at all. And I've seen more of the latter, for customization is just where the concept doesn't exist, especially with broker algos, because there's so many different types of parameters and things like that that are kind of unique to their strategies and things like that. But in terms of where there are standardized Fix fields, I haven't seen a lot of firms resorting to user-defined fields. Like I mentioned earlier, we've been pretty successful at just doing what you now call Fix latest and using that later tag in whatever version of the protocol that we're on.
Yeah.
But if it's something that, from my perspective, though, even if it's for something specific to broker algos, and there's something that's common across all algos, and I know there's been algorithmic working groups and things like that to try to standardize things, but the more standard things can be across brokers and use the same tags for the same concepts, the better, especially for me as a buy side and probably for vendors who are trying to maintain their algo suites. So, the more standardization we can have, even within user-defined fields, the better, because the easier it is for us to maintain things. And then, of course, that could all feed into Orchestra, and that could simplify how Orchestra is defined as well.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just seeing also a question coming in about Fix latest and whether it's able to support custom values in an existing Fix tag. And Fix latest hasn't changed the concept of user-defined fields or values. And the question also picks two very important fields, 150 and 39, exact type and order status. And so it's not like all fixed fields are equal. It's you have the vast majority of fields are just attributes, additional attributes. And the FIXinar or Fix Orchestra tells you whether it has a so-called union data type that you can add your own user-defined values. But where that's not the case, and exact type and order status, it is not the case. That is intentional because behind those single fields, you have an entire concept, an order state change model of Fix. And if you would say, well, you can just define your own exact type and order status values, that makes interoperability a lot harder. So for those cases, it would be, I think, most important to come forward to Fix and say exact type and order status. They don't cover the following scenario, or how should I do that? Because often enough, we've had people coming to Fix and explaining their requirement, and we say, well, it's covered, but not with the terms that you are using, or they weren't aware of Fix latest having covered that. So it's important to have sort of a central location at Fix. There's a discussion forum where you can post such questions and say, I would like to do the following, and for that I would like exact type and order status to have the following new values. And then you can start a discussion about this. When you just go ahead with your single counterparty and do that, it just reduces interoperability. That's my view on that. Maybe any of the panelists will also do comment on that customization of sort of these key fields.
Yeah, I mean, my preference would be that they come to the Fix group first to define those as values, and so they get recognized in an extension pack. I've never run into a situation like that with those sort of core fields like that where we needed an extra value. But
I mean,
go ahead.
Obviously, technically, you can do whatever you want. Yeah. So the question about Fix compliance and whether that should be enforced by Fix, there is no way to enforce that. Yeah. So it's about the community being willing to adopt this standard to make life easier for everybody that's in this community. And so it's about explaining the concepts and getting together to enhance what's there, and not just doing this bilaterally. So let's move forward to the last area. I wanted to raise a question regarding the tools and the role of the Fix organization in providing such tools, because obviously we also have a lot of vendors, not just buy side, sell side exchanges in the community, but also vendors offering services, offering software. I've talked a little bit about the tools like FIXinar or Log to Orchestra, and I would like to get your views and perspective whether the Fix organization should be providing such tools and in which manner. Yeah, so any thoughts?
Well, I think you had a poll at the beginning of the at the beginning of the session that asked how many people are actively using Fix Orchestra, and the rate, I believe, was low. It was about 15%.
Yeah.
And I think the tools that the Fix organization is putting out is going to help people get started with Orchestra. And I could see that evolving over time, where vendors may, start creating their own tools to work with their products, and what Fix is doing is kind of seeding the ecosystem for the use of Fix Orchestra.
Yeah, I do see the toolings that Fix provide is a mechanism to prime the pump, if you will, and then hopefully the vendors like Activity will pick up from there.
Yeah, and I think for buy sides like us that are doing a lot of their own development, there's a need for us to push that in the industry as well. So it's not something we've had time to dive into, but in another sense, I almost don't not have time because I'm spending so much time testing these things. If I could have a chance to compress that, we something we definitely should look into. So it is something we plan to look into further. And we have several buy sides that are actively involved in Fix that I think could have a big impact on pushing the envelope on that and making use of those tools.
Yeah. So I see in the Q&A a proposal for a tool which says, okay, how about given a log file and an Orchestra file, that tool would tell me if the messages in the file break any of the rules. Well, you don't need a log file for that. You just need an Orchestra file, because you can put in the Orchestra file anything that you like. So the Orchestra standard just tells you how this information needs to be structured. And but you can obviously put user-defined fields in there, user-defined values. So all you need is sort of an Orchestra file and an Orchestra reference file. So a Fix latest, which is available publicly with every extension pack, and then the tool would then scan through these two Orchestra files and say and tell you what's not contained in the reference file, meaning it deviates. But that I think is a great example where I think from the community or the Fix members, there are a lot of things where small tools like that could be created as open source projects, where members who or also non-members can contribute, and to the benefit of the entire community. And for the Global Technical Committee, it's often hard to find out, okay, what are the actual requirements? What are the actual things that would help people? The example here is something, if you will, like a compliance checker. Yeah. Obviously, any interface out there will have some deviation from Fix if it's only just the fact of using user-defined fields. Yeah. But it is much harder to have a tool that tells you if semantically you're using Fix correctly. And that's where we see the biggest issues in interoperability, if the semantics don't match the intention of Fix. And that's also a big topic then in the collaboration with ISO, how they have expressed the different concepts in their business model, and to see how that aligns with the Fix concepts. So I'd say that the tools that Fix develops have to be funded by the members. So there's only a limited capacity there, but it would be great if we could get more people to join on GitHub, where we have some open source projects there, and obviously to get such ideas as was proposed and then work together on them, sort of Fix being the role of administering, managing, and also contributing this process there. Okay.
Actually, Hanno,
This.
I think I read
Please.
that last question a little bit differently from you.
Oh.
If I'm reading it correctly, I think the question is, if this person has an orchestra file that details their rules of engagement and they have a log file, you know, I'm guessing what's being asked is can they have a tool that takes that log file and runs it against their own orchestra file to see if, you know, the testing or whatnot, you know, the log file from the test session meets the rules of their own orchestra file. That's how I'm reading that question.
Yeah. So I mean, the translation to an orchestra file would then obviously create fields that are not in the reference orchestra file.
Or flags that, you know, the log file, the raw log file had additional things that may break their own orchestra file.
Yeah, so not a fixed latest reference orchestra file, but your own orchestra file, and then you want to run that against a log file from a fixed engine. Yeah, and
I think this this is a new thing. We don't have anything like that.
So today the current tool Log2Orchestra uses a reference file, and it needs a reference file to look up the tag names. So it is sort of quite similar to what's there today. So if it doesn't find it, it would just have the tag in the created orchestra file. Yeah. And so that's not very far from then spitting it out in a log file saying unknown tag found, or unknown message found, or unknown value found. So that is an interesting enhancement. It may just be a minor enhancement to what we have today. And so thanks for that, for correcting that. So we're now, I think, in the Q&A, yeah, so the example here is another add-on to our example. To find out, sort of adding certain new rules if that would break any client implementation. So I think that's exactly one of those examples where this could be brought up and discussed in the FIXorchestra working group, and to then see if others see the same need, just like new fields, messages, and values, and then have the tools being extended or having a gap analysis to add new things to the standard, where we try to do things as generic as possible so that it applies to as many regions globally as possible, to as many asset classes as possible, but also to the specific use case that caused people to raise that issue as a gap there. Okay, but want to see if there's any more questions, and that I don't talk so much. Any more comments or thoughts from the panelists on our topic today?
Hanno, what would you say would be the best way for someone to get started with Orchestra if they're just wanting to learn about it and see how it could help them?
Yeah, I think if I can just briefly sort of share my screen again. This is sort of a very simplistic workflow, but it shows you those basic tools where only Log2Orchestra is published right now. Everybody has a fixed engine and should just play around with Log2Orchestra and see what kind of orchestra file is being created, and then can look into the specification of the technical standard to understand what these attributes mean, maybe just to come from a specific example, not try to theoretically read through the Fix Orchestra technical standard. That's very, very dry. And don't try to read the Orchestra XML for Fix Latest, because that has a few 100,000 lines in it. So start small with your own Fix engine there, and then see how that's represented. And then play around with Tablature, which is an open source GitHub project, to convert that to Markdown that you see here, Orchestra to MD on the slide. That translates this complex XML code into a more readable Markdown version where you have simple tables for your messages. And there's also a tool, MD to Orchestra, where you can convert that back to Orchestra. So you can author your interface that way. And we don't have time to get into that a lot, but on GitHub, please visit GitHub, where you'll find a lot of documentation on the Tablature tools to convert between Orchestra and Markdown, which is intended as a means of authoring, meaning to maintain an actual interface spec. So the last question there, is there a published roadmap and schedule for new extension packs? So as Lisa described earlier, the GTC depends on the Fix membership coming from working groups or directly to the GTC with new requirements. Obviously, we are monitoring the regulatory front, and with MiFID, we initiated some extension packs, but also those went through working groups where we then jointly, the GTC and the working group, put these documents together. So there's not sort of a pipeline for new extensions. That depends on the community coming forward. And on the tool side, that also depends on what the community needs, and those that are on GitHub can post issues there, make suggestions, or join the Fix Orchestra working group if you are a Fix member. So there's not this every month we publish one EP that covers something. Okay. Do we have time for one more question? I don't see another question there. So with that, I'd like to say a big thank you to our panelists. And hopefully we could provide you some information on what Fix Latest is about, and also Fix Orchestra and how they work together, and the topic of automation and machine readable rules of engagement. So we will definitely provide more information on that in the form of a FIXinar or other means in the future.
Perfect. Thanks, Hanno. Thanks, Brian and Lisa. It's been a great session. I think an hour is very good to put this topic in. It's lots to talk about. And if you would like to see a recording of this, it will soon be available on our YouTube channel. We also have discussion forums that you can get involved in. And if you would like to get involved in any of the working groups, please contact the Fix Program Office. We have some upcoming events. The next and final episode of the Americas FIXinar series will be on trade automation. There'll be a comm going out shortly. And there you can see the up and coming events for the EMEA region. I'd like to thank you all for joining, and see you next time. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good day.